Up bright and early, truth, justice, and the American way. I've been getting messages again from people who proudly proclaim that they are communists. So they believe in stealing property and murdering people and starving them to death in labor camps. And they believe that that's what Star Trek is all about. Well, live long and prosper. Oops, that sounds like free markets. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. The essential breakdown of the Marxist dialectic is that nothing is ever your fault. It's always someone else's. If they have something, they must have taken it from you, even though you never owned it. And it's okay to steal that away from them and murder them if they don't like it, put them in a labor camp and starve and work them to death. It is essentially a way of making excuses about why you imagine yourself oppressed, and it's always someone else's fault. And if there is no real oppression, which usually there's not, you invent a narrative. I'm attacked by the police because this, though verifiably, statistically, it's not true. I am one of these 53 other genders which do not exist except in my head, but I'm oppressed by, like, oh, that guy that just said that. Inventing identities of race, of the religion of essentially gender dysphoria, inventing ways that I'm oppressed, and therefore the making heroes of victims. Victimhood is heroic, and tying into this whole vindictive desire for revenge to murder all those people, dispose of the people that don't like me, don't approve of this, or dare to speak against it. Again, it's always their fault. It's someone else's fault. It's never me. I'm never wrong. I'm always oppressed. What all of this Bolshevik dialectic is borderline personality disorder writ large. It's probably crosses over into a group pathology. Nothing I ever do could ever be wrong. I must always get the trophy when I participate in any fashion. I must be praised for and affirmed for everything that I do say because I fall into a category that I imagine I invented and just pulled out of my rear end or out of a magic hat like an evil rabbit. But that's not really the point of today's video. Today's video is Star Trek. Star Trek is not communist. And let's clarify, communism and socialism are the same evil. To be a socialist is to say, I'm a moderate Nazi. I believe in starving Jews to death instead of putting them in gas chambers. There is no difference between socialism and communism. The only difference would be how quickly and how mercifully you kill people when you murder them to steal their stuff. It's the same thing. But there's this sort of cosmic idea out there, especially with Star Trek. For some reason, Star Trek is this communist society. Star Trek cannot be a communist society. A, they have technology and they have progress. Communism retards progress and technology. Inevitably, invariably, it always will, it must. Because once you've taken away all investment, once you've taken away all impetus then to invest yourself, to create, to build, you inevitably retard technology. When you take the money that would otherwise be used for research and development and redistribute it so that people can buy Cadillacs and Nikes, it disappears down the toilet. And once that money's gone, no one's building Cadillacs or Nikes. All manufacturing, all production begins to cease. You have to mandate it, direct it with slave labor. This just does not work. So Star Trek cannot exist in a communist society because they would not have starships, they would not have technology. If communism won out in the end of the Third World War, Zefram Cochrane will never build his warp drive. He will never build the warp drive Phoenix, and he will not go into space, and he will not meet the Vulcans. All of that scrap metal, all of that equipment, all of that stuff will be redistributed and used to build firearms that are used to gun down everybody who disagrees with the tyranny and to build the fences around the death labor camps. That's how that works. In fact, side note, the only reason the Soviet Union and China have ever had any level of technology is they stole it. The Soviet Union took it from the Nazis and other places that they stole information using their spies. The Chinese are constantly ripping off Western technology, sending their students to universities to learn it. Predictably, they can't maintain it there. They have to keep sending their students over to learn it, and so on, because communism retards technology and progress. It just does. So Zefram Cochrane will never build the warp drive, and they will never go into space, and therefore there is no Star Trek universe with communism. Let's assume that there is, that they go ahead and they build the first 12 Constitution-class ships, and then they become communist in the period right before Captain Kirk. You can't have Captain Kirk, because Mr. Spock is clearly an underrepresented minority. Kirk and people like him will be murdered and sent to death camps in order to replace them with people like Spock. Spock will be captain of the Enterprise, and in this version of the Federation, there will be no prime directive. There cannot be. By definition, you cannot respect others. You get rid of culture, religion, ethnicity, politics, you name it. Everything goes into the void of the toilet on a cosmic level, so you can create the soulless, lifeless, religionless, passionless, nationless, communist utopia. So Spock, now in command of the Enterprise, a crew made up of all the diverse entities that check the various boxes under CRT writ to a species level, so none of the original crew is allowed there, maybe one to be a token human. You arrive to a strange new world, you meet a new species, you say, take me to your leader. They take you to their leader, you kill that leader, you murder everybody in the government, you round up everyone in that society's upper class, however that's measured or weighed, send them to a labor death camp so they can be worked and starved to death, and redistribute their wealth among people. That's Star Trek according to the communist model. And again, it cannot go on like that. Either free species will rise up and stop its spread and destroy it, tracing it all the way back to the earth and putting it down and out of its misery, or it will win out and it will have its cosmic revolution for a time until all the ships are recalled home to be dismantled so the metal can be used to make firearms of the most primitive type to guard the labor death camps, starvation camps where people are enslaved, because again, the technology is retarding. Nobody's able to fix it anymore. No one's able to build it anymore. And unless you find species to steal it off of, that is the end. So your inevitable outcome is a federation that becomes a Chinese rather than a Soviet model that just keeps leeching technology and resources off the others, that it conquers and absorbs, that it steals everything that it needs and perpetuates the tyranny until one day it fizzles out. Or you have the Soviet model that fizzles out immediately. But you cannot have Star Trek if there is communist, if communism is driving the Star Trek universe. It is not. The Federation is not communist, because inevitably the road leads not to the new frontier, but back to the slave labor starvation camps back on Earth, because that's how it works. Of course, there are plenty of people that are already out there, and people who, like me, believe in free markets that would say, oh, I don't like Star Trek because it's socialist. They've bought into this as well. What evidence is there for this? Where are the death, labor, slave, and starvation camps? How is it that they're building the technology? Now, they do talk about money becoming outmoded, although interestingly, in Kirk's time, they're still using money. We get references to money in The Next Generation, even though in that era we hear money's outmoded. We know that Riker gets money. There's vouchers that are owed to him by Quark. People go to Quark's to buy stuff. Quark makes money. All of this would be impossible if there was no money and none of it was ever changing hands. Clearly it is. What we do see with Star Trek, what has changed, is that industrial technology, or technology, has developed at a level that the industrial economy as we know it doesn't exist. Are machines making machines? Likely. We don't really see that, not in real Star Trek. We do have replicators that make things, even phasers and tricorders. We have industrial replicators, which make even bigger and more complex things. Can an industrial replicator make a replicator? Either one of these can make components that can be put together by humans to make a new one of each of these replicators. So there are people that work on building starships, building replicators, building the technology, but it seems to be an infinitesimally small percentage of people. There are no great factories turning out this stuff with millions of people laboring. It is not the auto industry of the 20th or 21st century assembly line. So in a situation where the means of production are so accessible, where the means to produce is so cheap, energy and production is infinitesimally inexpensive by comparison, you have an entire economic reordering. And what we do see in Star Trek is that people, as they say a couple of different times in the movie and then in Deep Space Nine, people work to better themselves and the rest of humanity. There's no reason why Captain Sisko's dad has to run a restaurant. He runs a restaurant because he wants to, because his ancestors ran a restaurant, because they were chefs all the way back. It is in very much in line with keeping an art form going for the sake of the art form, not to make a profit. Because living on Earth, Ben Sisko, his dad, Joseph Sisko? I'm blanking on that. Someone out there remind me. But the Siskos don't have to work to keep the lights on and keep their water running at home. That's all taken care of. But they work because they want to. Now, in this sense, Star Trek, yes, is a very optimistic view of the future. It's a very optimistic view of humanity. Most people would not do that. Most people who didn't have to work for a living would fritter their life away on essentially the 7 deadly sins. This is why money still exists. I mean, you can't spend all your time in the holosuite at Quarks. Presumably, you've got to do something to earn the ability to get a holodeck at home. They don't seem to be things that are built for everybody. So if you want to indulge in all the lusts and trials and tribulations, I almost said tribulations, all the things you could do on the holodeck that involve your sinfulness, you'd have to get a hold of one first. So again, there seems to be a certain sort of merit-based system. Certain things have to be earned and worked for. And whoopsie. So there is some sort of merit-based system to earn certain things, but yes, nobody on Earth is worried about where their next meal comes from or keeping the electricity on. But that is not communism, because if it were, they would not have a meal coming or have the lights on. So what we do see with Star Trek is this change drastically in the economic situation because of the technology. And we already are sort of looking at this as a society now. If we were to develop very cheap manufacturing, very cheap energy technology, things that were easily accessible, we already have a growing surplus population of people that wouldn't need to be involved directly in that sort of economy. This means a shift from everybody having a job that earns a paycheck that adjusts their means of living so that they can go to work, earn a paycheck that pays for their means of living, to that cycle becoming not as necessary changes the way that they deal with money and the way they look at their labor. But the fact that they are allowed to decide, the fact that they're free and there is money and they can spend it and they can do whatever, and they don't enslave every planet they come to, and they are not constantly, there is not in a sense, what the economy of Star Trek has done has completely made the communist notions obsolete, because communism is obsessed with finding division, creating division, lying about division, and pitting people against one another. And what we see in Star Trek with the harmony between people, the active, intentional working for harmony, that cancels out any possibility of communism existing. Because again, communism would kill Captain Kirk for being a patriarchy, Terran-centered speciesist and replace him with Spock. And that's what communism would do. So it can't exist in the optimistic view in the Star Trek universe. Only freedom can. And you would never, ever get there except that you have not become communist.